thing with government roles is what is the impact of the government? In other words, I picked on the government a number of times. I will. What roles does the government have? Now, we mentioned before, at the core of it, the government's objective is to make things better. In other words, you're the government, your objective, your role in general is to improve things, to improve the situation. Now, as I go through these government roles, I admit I'll be orbiting around two, economic theories, which we'll cover after the first exam to give you a reference what they're both like in greater detail. Is the new classicus, which tends to be centered around the market economy, which you have free market, which is just all the government is dealing with thieves, criminals, stuff like that. You have the market economy, which is the economy, the market's handling most of the economy. The government deals with potholes or corrections, stuff like that. Things are having difficulties. But in general, if you're running your life, you're left alone unless you commit crime, something like that. You see me? Then you have managed economy, where the government's trying to coordinate and direct the economy. The government's acting like for lack of a better term, the manager. The person's telling industries, individuals, this is how you should live your life. That's how you do things. Then you have socialism, where the belief is everything in the managed economy, plus there's the belief that the government can run a number of industries better, and you end up with a better, fair distribution of income if the government engages in large-scale income redistribution. Now, the neo-Keynesian tends to go over the managed in the socialist range. Those two under that umbrella. New classicalists, the market economy tends to be under them. Now, keep in mind, both these economic theories want to find out what works, when they work. There'll be a certain number of things that are going to be common because it achieves the greatest efficiency, and so they have an absolutist about them. So what are the roles the government be doing? Now, I said we established the government has weaknesses. It cannot easily measure success, which is, and success means what it does well. No, it's when I can't easily measure it. And as we become a more fallen society, it gets worse. In other words, a very moral society, the government's not going to fake, paper over, and lie. In other words, in the last, since the, late, noughts or the very early teens, the government in the United States started faking figures, which was new. The U.S. government didn't fake things like unemployment stats, inflation rates, stuff like that. It's like, oh, here it is, boom. Well, they started changing that because it make us look bad. So when that becomes, bad, that's a loss of morality. It's very difficult to measure successes. We already mentioned before, even when you talk something like wars, if you're talking a total war, yes, you've conquered enemy's capital, taken it, the enemy is defeated, they acknowledge they're defeated, you made them eat dirt, there you go, you're victorious, your military is successful. No one's bothered you. Your military, I guess, could say is successful because no one's bothered you, that kind of situation. The worst, the government does not pay for its failure. Whenever the government fails, somebody else pays. I apologize for lock of hair keeps falling across my head. Whenever the government fails, somebody else pays. The government can impose the cost of its failure on somebody else. And oftentimes, this gets very, very bad, the government will discount the cost to people. This is why I get so furious. And keep in mind, this concept being furious about government officials discounting the cost of people runs across theories. Well, except for communists, which is psychotic. It runs across theory because, if I'm a neo-Keynesian, I want the government to do what is right, not because the government exists for the betterment of the population. In other words, the government exists for the betterment of the population. Its purpose is to raise the utility level of the population. When the government discounts what happens to people or will make their lives more miserable, economically, something that says, oh, you'll thank me for it later, they should accept this. No, then the government has failed in its primary purpose, which is the betterment of the population. So that's what other ideologies that are not economic or different. Don't mind me, I'm trying to get my hair to keep from being psychotic, so I apologize for this. All the other ideologies are coming in. I pick on the communist countries here. No, I don't pick on them because they're psychotic. They sacrificed millions of their own people's lives, their own people, not fighting other people. It's not like, oh, we're fighting the Germans or the Japanese during World War II, and we're leveling their cities and getting rid of a lot. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking they killed their own people. They sacrificed their own people wastefully because the what they were achieving was worth any price as long as the peasants paid. For example, during the Russian Civil War, Lenin's his mistress got sick. So she needed a vacation, a nice Mediterranean climate, so he shipped her down to a place. It's basically in a time when you have limited trains, rolling stock, everything. His mistress got a special train, a priority movement, so she could be shipped down to the Black Sea area and have a long recuperative vacation while people are dying. Yeah, I pointed out because remember theoretically, we saw other things like yes, but theoretically, the system dedicated to the population. So, what is the role for the government? What can the government do? And yes, the government has several roles it may fulfill. And I rank these roles from the most positive. And I admit, I'm doing this as an economist. It has from the most positive to the most, normative. From one that works, it is always good. It is always functional. It can achieve positives, no negative stuff like that. In other words, it's going to make us better off. This one's really in debate. And again, the criteria, it goes to the most positive, feasible, appealing, or that's potentially inefficient. The criteria is simple. What delivers the best return to the population? Remember, the government exists for the betterment of the population, period. That's what its objective is. Now, the first of the government roles is actually simple, law and order. Now, law and order is simple. The alternative to law and order is anarchy. Looting, pillaging, stealing. How some people say, because they're pushing some agenda. Oh well, will be people steal until they have all the food they need, all the goods they need, because it's not fair. The human race has been poor. Hold on, shock guys doing his lectures. Sorry about that. That's my youngest daughter. She's got she's disabled, and so she comes in and says hello. But going back to that. Getting back my thought. People say, "Oh, it's like human being race has been poor, dirt poor, for millennia." And in many cases, until you get to an affluent country, stealing, especially if you can get away with it, is far more effective than working. So when people say, "Well, but stealing produces nothing. Stealing loots, pillages." Many places that are fantastically dirt poor today. Sure, you have places like North Korea and Cuba that are communist and mostly run by the state, and they're dysfunctional. We have other places that Libya has declined into vast poverty. Somalia is a wasteland. A lot of people think Somalia is a great place. Other Somalis in the United States who say their homeland is so much better than the United States was. Which, they're lying. But in Somalia, they loot, they pillage. When countries break down civil war, which we can tell you, people loot and pillage, and especially it's lower than civil war, anarchy. So law and order, the alternative to law and order is anarchy. Now, what types of law you have, that is for the people to decide. Any law is a normative judgment. We can make a different assessment on that. That there should be laws is a pure positive, because not having laws mean people loot, pillage, and steal. That's why the Purge movies was totally stupid, because if people could do violence for a day, someone saw a Star Trek episode and said, "This would be cool. Let's make a movie on this, except for more violent." The problem is the destruction you do in one day is more than you're going to recover in weeks. In other words, you could, in fact, in one day's destruction, you could destroy a year's growth, because people are doing all sorts of damage. So you wouldn't have insurance companies because they'd all collapse because people are out and doing damage, because they can kill people on that day. It's insane. That's anarchy. Okay, law and order. Now, for having law and order, the first thing is there must be equality under the law. Now, equality under the law means the law is exactly the same for everybody. I don't care who you are. If you go and eviscerate a human being because you're Jack the Ripper, you're going to get arrested and sentenced the same way you would if you were a royal, or if you were a merchant, or if you were whatever. The law is exactly the same. Equality under the law. Unless you say, illegal aliens aren't treated the same. No, the law says if you are here illegally, you are to be removed. The laws treat everybody the same. The people who are, citizens, that they're left alone because why? They're citizens. The people who commit an action, being here legally, they've committed an action. That's equality under law. You steal, equality under law. Now, as I said, any particular law is there, but you want equality in the law because one of the first things people are going to do, and I'm going to rag on this a number of times, is they want to create inequality in the law. In other words, they want to be nobles. This is why I trash Hollywood. I trash the Green Movement. Is their rampant hypocrisy that they don't even, they believe they should be treated specially, that they have special privileges, and no one should, dare impinge on them. That's inequality law. That's two different standards. So it's equality law, and I mean this, and I'm talking this as an economist. And again, we are equal. Okay, my equal sign's not perfect, but everyone should, whether you're my friend or my enemy, you go back to the New Testament. Even the tax collectors, even the pagans treat their families the same. So when Christ says treat your enemies as yourself, there's if you're enemy at war, it is a different thing. But the people you don't like, the people who you think are bad, the people you think are obnoxious, the people who may have wronged you, they must treat you the same way by the same standard. That is equality to law. A great example is in the Dreyfus case. It's funny, the actor Richard Dreyfuss is the grandson of the officer Dreyfus, who was convicted for spying on Germany, spying on France for Germany. It turned out it was somebody else who was doing this. When there's a case got appealed to be investigated again, the French military picked a Catholic who was a known anti-Semite. In other words, he didn't like Jews. When the officer investigated the case, because Dreyfus already he was on Devil's Island and stuff like that, he discovered Dreyfus didn't do it. So while he may not have liked Dreyfus because he was Jewish, that was the irrelevancy. The law states you go to jail if you committed a crime of espionage against France. Dreyfus did not commit the crime of espionage against France, so he goes what? He goes free. That's equality to law. Transparency. Transparency exactly says anybody can go and look at it. Now, transparency and defined, have a big overlap, and both of them overlap with equality and law. Transparency means anybody can go look at it. No, it's not just the lawyers or the high government officials, stuff like that say there are these laws, but you cannot look at them because you're too stupid. No, anybody can go look at them. Anybody can go see them. So you act as a race. So, for example, the Southern Baptist in the 1960s and 70s, over half of their leadership was pro-abortion and stuff like that. They were not even people really following the word of God and stuff like that. You had a revolt from the pews. In other words, the common people in the churches, the Bible's transparent, anyone can read it, and they went and they removed pastors who did not follow the word, who were not preaching the word, because why? Anybody could go and read the word. It was transparent. That acted as a break against those who were doing things. That's why when you have heresies and stuff like that coming along, people say, oh, don't you look at, you're too common. It needs an exceptionally special boom, right there, Transparency, and we can go and look at. Defined. Defined is easy. Anyone knows what it means. So that way, for example, I like using common because it's a great example of ruining of everything. Defined means everyone knows what it is. In fact, the Soviet Union, when someone, Lenin himself said, even Marx wrote stuff like this in his writings. They said, do not let the law be defined. Leave it ambiguous. That's why people say, those are words that hurt. What are words that hurt? Words that hurt are worse than being stabbed. No, they're not. I see, I'm old. I grew up in days of sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt me. That kind of situation. Now we have people who say, it is, you stabbing somebody is actually not as hurtful as somebody using a bad word. So if somebody uses a bad word and that person gets their head cut off, well, you know what? The bad word was worse. No, it wasn't. In fact, when you say that, you violate what? Equality under the law, because are you going to apply that both ways? Heck, Colorado just had their once gay, always gay law overturned. That was a violation of equality under the law. And it was defined. It said, you cannot, it was illegal. Even if someone came to help you, for someone who was, declared gay, if they came to you as a psychiatrist or a professional person in your area and said, can you help me move away from the gay lifestyle? That was illegal under Colorado law. Now, the law was defined, everyone could tell what it meant. You said, you can't do this. Once gay, they're always gay, and they should always stay gay. And people are like, oh, wait a minute here. You're not doing equine law, because equine law would say, okay, if once gay, always gay law, do you have once Christian, always Christian laws? In other words, I'm treating what? I'm treating people unequally. The action's not the same. So people go to school rooms to convert everybody to being, alternatively preference, but you can't make them become Christian. I'm pointing out, in other words, is it defined? Now, communism would leave laws vaguely defined, like you hurt my feelings, you created a hostile environment. What does that mean? How can I obey a law I don't? And communists like laws being, because Lenin said, and Marx, and the people following, if people think they're obeying the law, they won't act with fear and full security of making sure they're sure and pushing the revolution. So you have to create an aura of, uncertainty. You must make them unsecure, make them feel like they need to do more to be with the revolution. So you had ill-defined laws. How do I obey an ill-defined law, though? And so we want efficiency, we want laws and laws to work. Boom, we want equality law, we want transparency, and we can go look at it. That way, the system's not trying to cheat or anything like that. It's defined. Now, keep in mind, nothing on this world is going to be perfect. As Christians, you should always remember that. Humans are fallen creatures. This is why mistakes, as people say, with like universalists or who want to make everything good, will say, oh, man is born perfect about it. So, but everywhere they are in chains. And the people are not born perfect little innocent little creatures. I've had 9 children. I love all my children. But, a lot of them young, they were tough. Some of the adults, I wonder about some of the cubes and I pray for them. Again, law and order, the truth is, they agree on the pure positive nature of law and order, because anarchy is insane. It provides a concrete gain from, law and order can be done with less than 1%, probably less than 0.5% economy of GDP, and you can have law and order. So the gains are massively greater than the losses. The only people would probably be upset would be those people who want to steal from other people. In other words, take from others because they view themselves superior. Remember, when you're a thief, you view yourself as superior to somebody else because you want to what? Take from them. I know people say, no, this other person's a thief. If I make something that I make and I sell to somebody and they buy it from me willingly, I have not stolen from them. I have made them better off. That's why they bought it. Okay, again, people are not, so it's very cheap. Again, less than 0.5% of the economy, and you can achieve law and order. People are not steal, loot, or pillage. It's great. They concentrate their energies on productivity, on building, on creating. If you're wondering why my mouse was always ugly, I'm using a mouse pad, not a mouse. Again, if people are allowed to loot, stillage, and pillage, it's easy to work, and they will do that. The sad thing is when you have crime like this, in fact, a number of U.S. cities that can't go back have actually legalized Los Angeles. San Francisco did, Seattle did. They raised crime to, well, if you're stealing, less than $1,000, it doesn't really count. No one's going to call you. No one's going to do anything. So people loot and steal. People loot and steal. All neighborhood stores get shut down because why? People loot and steal. That's it. And you see the cost of living in those neighborhoods rise 100, 200%, because why? People are stealing, they're looting, they're pillaging. And again, if you say as a culture, if you say this is good, this is acceptable, you get more of it. You say pillaging, looting, stealing, that's perfectly fine, you will get more of it. In fact, in New York in the early 90s, Mayor Giuliani came in, he's like, okay, I'm going to stop the crime. And he did. The cost of living dropped in New York because crime dropped. Crime dropped. Firms are not spending as much money dealing with thievery crimes. Because he said it was bad and he dealt with it. You say it is good, you will get more of it. And if people know they can steal, loot, or pillage, or do other things, they will. I don't think I have, but England had massive rape gangs, and they still do. The British government does nothing about it because the people committing the rapes, they basically, they're a protected class, so we don't want to hurt their feelings, which means you're doing inequality in the law. Okay. The next one is ensuring perfect competition. The first one dealt with human beings, individuals. The second one deals with market, supply and demand, which is the firm, but also individuals getting things. Ensure perfect competition. Ensure supply and demand hold. Again, this is cheap. One and two to come together are maybe 1% of your economy to do, and the benefits are multiple times greater than that. You go from being in anarchy to having a functional, developing, growing economy. Beautiful. Now, private property, I have that highlighted or typed out in red, is a prime and necessary condition. In fact, new classics say never endanger private property. You must allow it to exist and leave it alone. Neo-Keynesians believe you can have more flexibility with it, but again, it should be defined on how the government takes property. There should be defined standards. The government can't just arbitrarily grab it. You must have the rules defined and delineated. So these two theories base it not because it's because the Neo-Keynesians, remember, it's the managed socialist end. They believe the government can do a little bit better with the resources, some resource times, but they don't want to destroy supply and demand. They do want perfect competition. So the seizure of private property, the Neo-Keynesians want defined. The new classicals say never. An example of a divergence between two theories was over what's called the Kelo decision in the United States 2 decades ago. Went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Took years to get this, like some years. And what occurred? The city of New London had seized a person's land, and the two theories. The Supreme Court split 5-4. The four people looking mostly from a new classicist point of view said the government cannot take land because what the government had done in Kelo. In fairness to Pfizer Pharmaceutical, yes, the giant corporation Pfizer, did not go to the city of New London and say, give us this people's land. Pfizer was looking at expanding one of their plants, but they needed a lot of territory around it to expand and build it. The city of New London said, we will give you all this land. We'll take it from the people who own it. We'll give it to you, Pfizer, so you can expand your plant because that'll mean more jobs, more opportunity. And so that land was taken and given to Pfizer. The people, Kelo and other people lost their land, appealed to U.S. through the court system, going to the Supreme Court saying, the city took our land not even for public usage, which is allowable in the Constitution as long as you're compensated. They took it and gave it to a private firm. And that's not fair. Now, the Supreme Court ruled, and this is the difference between the two theories. The Supreme Court ruled, written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, ruled that since the land would have theoretically a more productive use being given to this other person from the owners who had it before to Pfizer Pharmaceutical, and the productive uses would yield more tax revenue to the city of New London. So the city of New London would have higher tax revenue. It could use that tax revenue to benefit more people, and thus it would be a net gain for the community. Now, we're dealing with economics, you should always know that. And so that was the base of the ruling. Now, on the base of that ruling, the city of New London took more land. They took more land, and this land they were going to use for a giant marina and stuff like that. In other words, they were going to take more of it. Now, the marina was never developed. In fact, all this land, was it in 2012, 2013, Pfizer shut down their factory in New London. In other words, it was no longer efficient to operate in Connecticut, in this city, so they shut down the plant. The plant was losing money, so the whole large factory shut down. All those jobs were lost. How much tax revenue is the city of New London getting from it? Nothing. It's getting nothing from it. But nobody has come in and bought any of these land. The giant marina the city of New London wanted to make, would bring in lots of money. Oh, we'd be swimming in cash. The city would be doing great. Nobody bought that either. So it all lies fallow because nobody wants to come in. In other words, you have streets, in some cases no streets because everything was torn up, and there's nothing on it. Okay, why don't people buy up those lots and stuff like that? Oh, that's right. See, if I went and bought up some of those lots, let's just say I'm a medium or a small person, I'm building a half dozen houses for people, and I buy up a bunch of little lots. The city of New London may say, "Oh, we got a big buyer. They're gonna put in 1,000 jobs. We need that land back." And they'll just take it from me. And the Kelo decision says, since it's worthwhile, the firms don't offer you full value. They don't offer you, because remember, private ownership is the right to say no. You could not say no. So in many parts of countries, mega corporations, look who's winning, mega corporations and billionaires do not go to the person they want to buy the land from. They go to the county or the state and say, give us their land, because we're going to do something better with it. In other words, use their connections. This is why, for example, Bill Gates and Zuckerberg have been trying to buy up farmland in the United States to make it all go fallow to save the environment. Of course, if you make farmland go fallow, there's not as much food grown and food prices go up. But then they say, since we're saving the environment, the government should give us compensation because we're so good. They're doing what? They're developing connections. So they're seizing other people's property, give them, so they're not paying for it. And then they're getting the government to give them money for being good with it. You're violating. So private property is a necessary condition. When you lose private property, when you eliminate it, when you get rid of private property, the megacorps and the billionaires, the ultra rich and megacorps, they don't go to the market to get goods anymore. They go to who? They go to the government. So if I want perfect competition, I want supply and demand ruling, I want efficiency, I want private property. Okay, some of the other things we've seen before, equality law. Equality law means exactly that. Everyone is treated by the same standard. Boom. And this is where I go back to Kelo, the elimination of private property. Were they treated by the same standard? No. Small and medium people lost their land. A megacorp got it. The government shifted in favor of a megacorp. When other countries, as we'll see later, seize property, they do not give it to little people and let them keep it. They give it to people connected with government, either in corruption or megacorps who connect with what? The government. So it must be equine law. It means everybody's playing by the same rules. And so when I use equine law, I mean a biblical standard, a New Testament standard. In the eyes of God, there is neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free. Everyone, God views everyone the same way. They're all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Those are absolutes. It's clear and defined. Everybody knows what it means. Everybody knows how it functions. Now, keep in mind, you can have unfair laws, and they be clear and defined. They're still unfair because in other words, when you had various castes and stuff like that, it was unfair. They were defined, but they were unfair. They were not equals. I mean, ease of access. It is easy for new firms to come in. It's easy for new firms to come in. It's easy for firms to leave. When a firm fails and dies, it does the dying cockroach. Fine, they're supposed to be able to do that. Firms have to fail, otherwise they don't learn. Especially megacorps have to fail. Transparency. Again, transparency. The laws, again, we said about before, everybody knows what it is. Everybody can go look at it. Everybody can go see it. And the common people can figure it out. In fact, transparency is what undid a scam, as we're going to touch, later in this lecture, done by Dan Rather on George Bush the Younger. He lied, but transparency showed his lie, which he got very indignant about. Antitrust. Now, antitrust, exactly. This is TR, and TR's there, and he's saying, get rid of the bad trust. Now, trust is a monopoly, and getting rid of the bad monopolies are going to eliminate the bad monopolies. The good ones, we're going to let them exist. Now, I don't believe there's a good monopoly. The best you can close to is you might have some that you might have to control, but are not bigger monopolies. In fact, it's one of those times where I tend to agree with the EU in a managed system in the sense of I believe in antitrust activity. Now, an interest rate on average, new classicals will tend to say, and I agree with this, even number new Keynesians, well, there's not as much collision here. If you have trust, break them up. Neo Keynesians will sometimes say control, particularly when you get in the socialist end, we'll control these large. In fact, the chairman of the Fed, who's Neo Keynesian, believes the United States has too many banks. We have about 6,000 banks in the United States. He believes the United States only have about 10 banks. That way, he can control them and coordinate them all better. Yes, but how come every time we've had a mega bank, while he's been chairman of the Fed, every time we've had a mega bank fail, he's been up there, even though the law says it's illegal to bail them out. He has gone and bailed them out. Is he playing equal? No, he's not. But see, the people running those banks, they're friends of his. He knows them. They're smart people. No, they're not. They failed. For example, I would take the Disney Corporation, all these mega corporations, the $100 billion range, the $1 trillion range, I'd shatter them. I'd break them up. At Disney, I would have there's your Marvel division. That's its own little movie section. There's and separated. No, it's not part of Disney. I'd basically shatter Disney up. Disney has their theme parks. There are the Disney movies. There are the the Star Wars brand. I would break it up into Disney Plus is going to be its own little corporation now, which is not even little. It'd be a multi-billion, and make them all exist and have to negotiate and compete. Because Disney would all of a sudden become very competitive. They would say, what does the consumer need or what they want? Because they're not making things we want, they're making things they want. And those have failed. But the people running Disney, this is an example of decay. Disney, since it's so large, the people running it do not care. In fact, what is it? The new CEO of Disney came out and attacked people over people attacking someone because of the Odyssey. How dare they? It's this, religiousness. They're really doing the whole racist thing. Always the racist. It's like, well, he's not asking. In fact, the people attacking it in the controversy saying the actress, had on a fictional work that was, she was in, the whole, Black Panther content says, no, Wakanda must be done right because it's an example of black culture. It's a fictional place. It never occurred. Now, the Trojan Wars did occur. Troy was uncovered 150 years ago. It is, it is an actual part of, it's not, a cartoon kingdom that became a movie kingdom a decade ago. It is a long line. If she said no one can represent, this item except for Africa, it's part of African, it's Africa. Well, Greece is Greece. What about Greek culture? And people saying you're interfering with Greek culture, Greek history, what has been written and known about this for millennia, and you're violating it. And he came out and called on an attack. Okay, now what is he doing? He's attacking people who might be buying goods in the same way. Here he has a problem with people who may purchase his things. So in other words, he's damaging his shareholders, stuff like that, because he's like he doesn't view the customer as his equal. And so that's why you have antitrust. See, when it gets so large, a lot of these firms don't care about people. Now, a lot of times these firms may eventually fail, but I would shatter them because they get so large, they're going to seek special privileges. Public goods. This is when the government is going to provide a good or service to the population. If you hear a noise in the background, I think one of my neighbors is cutting the lawn or something, really grinding. What if they're digging something up? It's not causing my house to vibrate, so it's not too bad. But public goods are very expensive. Defense, education, healthcare, roads. This is when you pay money to the government and the government provides a good or service. Now, sometimes these things can be done, privately. Military not as much so, and police. But it's the fact of it's saying the government could be providing this good. But the difficult thing is the government doesn't necessarily have cost control. And this way it gets ill because these goods become very, very expensive. Taxes, remember, tax create those deadweight losses, those inefficiencies, reduce output. The things we're losing, the reduction of output, no one gets that. We lost it. So automatically, when you tax, you shrunk the pie. Now we're losing a section of that and it's going to the government. The question comes, is the government going to use it better than we do? The bigger the slice the government has to take, the more your deadweight loss is. We go back to the first two, the slice the government was taking for law and order and perfect competition, boom, 1% of the economy. It's the United States, this is weird for you to think of and us to think of, 115 years ago, the United States had no national income tax. All the federal government was allowed to do was tax imports and do some excise taxes. That was it. Our government was small, itsy bitsy. Because the government wasn't providing many goods or services. Okay, now the Keynesians will tend to like public goods and they tend to support them because they can stimulate the economy, because we'll be spending, as we'll see later, and allows them to direct and plan the economy forward. The new classicists believe public goods should be very delineated and defined so we can try to figure out where they're working, and a lot of these things can be privatized or minimized. In other words, a lot of things are saying the government shouldn't get into because it won't be good at it. It'll be inefficient. The inefficiency will dominate. And the government will try to direct and control the economy, which will destroy the functioning of markets. In other words, these two viewpoints are going to be very much in collision. Not because they're hostile to each other. It's because the fact of the different core assumptions on the macro level don't agree with each other, and it's difficult to sort that things out. When we find something that doesn't work, they both say, yeah, get rid of that, doesn't work. Dealing with externalities. Now, externalities are third-party cost. A third-party cost is A, I'm a firm, I am making a good. I am producing it for B, a consumer. In the process of making that good, C gets hurt. So, for example, the biggest example of this is being pollution. Why is all this pollution there off in the lake and stuff like that? Well, what may be happening is A, I am making a good for B. Now, keep in mind, my good, I will very rarely hurt B because if I hurt B, B won't give me money. They'll stop buying from me because either A, they'll be dead, which is, they can't buy from me because they're dead. Or I hurt them, they don't buy from me because I hurt them. But either in the making of the good or the production of the good, C is hurt. C is made worse off. So a third person, not included, is hurt by the production or consumption of good. Now, I mean demonstrably measurement hurt. And that's why I use pollution as a great example, because pollution does lots of damage. Now, unlike, Captain Planet and stuff like that, a lot of environmentalists say, the firm's doing it because they want to hurt people. No, excuse me, I sneeze. Excuse me. I got to walk a little bit. The firm's not doing this because they want to hurt people. Remember, as a firm, I make money by meeting the needs of the population. And keep in mind, I don't like a lot, especially the megacorps. I dislike most of them because the people running them are not concerned about the shareholders or about the consumers. They're concerned about their vision because Iger made billions running Disney, even though he lost Disney tens of billions of dollars. So he didn't care about the shareholders. He only cared about his vision. So, but we're going next now. This one, like I said, pollution. friends don't say, I'm going to pollute this river because I want to pollute this river. Oh, I don't kill people. Oh. No, they're saying what? I am making a good. In the process of making a good, I am generating sludge. I don't, and I dump the sludge in the river because why? That's the cheapest thing to do. I sell the good to B. He lives over, 3 mountains away. And C, who lives downstream down the river, he or she is hurt. It has happened a number of times. Just the reason you deal with externalities is not because they're doing it out of evil. They're doing it because, roughly speaking, you don't think about it because you don't deal with C. And so that is a third-party cost. That is a brute. So now third-party benefits. I just, the Book of Heart call a lot of things third-party benefits, and I'm like, time out. Like the book will claim a number of times, oh, all government spending is third-party benefit. No, it's not. I am not being cruel here. In fact, we'll do a number of things that can be useful government spending, but because remember, a third-party benefit is when A is making something. I apologize. A, let's put A in. Oh, come on, work with me. I apologize. A is making something. Here she's selling it to B. Here's B. And then in the process, C, let's use a different color for C here. I use green. C is made better off. So C's got an improvement there. She's like, oh, I'm doing great. I was improved. C's demonstrably better off, likes what's being done. When people say, this thing's a third-party benefit, B, who may be benefiting from what the government's doing, or maybe the government itself will say, oh, this is helping C. We should do more of it. And C's like, no, it's not. It's not helping me at all. Why is saying it's helping me? And that situation will be occurring. And so I point this out. Don't mind me having a Tums. See, Tums. Well, I'm dealing with the government, so it gives me acid. Beekeeping, though, is a great example of a one-time positive externality that used to exist. Now, way back in ancient times, and big time in the Middle Ages, and what's in the Middle Ages, had you started getting property rights, right? Beekeeping became a very big industry. And keep in mind, this is beekeeping in the Middle Ages. You don't have all these nice suits there. I am, bee farmer number 3. I'm walking around in my tunic and stuff like that, my tunic and my pants and my shoes, and I'm dealing with bees. Why am I doing bees? Beekeeping yields honey, which I sell, because a lot of people can use honey. They like the taste, stuff like that. Having sugar's way too expensive. And also I sell wax, which is used for sealing things. It's used for candles. Wax is a very useful item. So I'd basically grow bees, harvest, and sell them. Interesting thing, farmers living around me saw their output be 10, 15, 20% higher than farmers not around beekeepers. And this is why when you go back, and sometimes farms have good, actually, but running your own bees hives is very difficult. But, farms would have them. Because they would have a higher, because the bees cross-fertilize crops, make crops stronger, helps crops grow better and stuff like that by their actions. That's a third-party benefit. In other words, the beekeepers are making it to sell honey and wax to the consumers. The consumers pay the beekeepers money. There you go. See, the farmers have made benefit. The market realized this was happening. And so nowadays, beekeepers actually ship the bees around. Honey and wax are just side components of, those are side things of doing what I do in beekeeping. My big thing is doing what? I move my hives all over the country and rent them to farmers so farmers get better output. And so that is a return to beekeepers. And so that became, so the positive externality was solved. It was markets will solve third party benefits because third person is made better off. I can sell this because a lot of people aren't getting the benefit. Remember, the only farmer who was getting this benefit was the ones right next to beehives. But thousands of other farmers, the vast majority, weren't getting the benefit. The beekeepers realized how to sell it, and so lots of farmers get it because they're getting a net improvement, and so the beekeepers. Okay, let's go back to negative. This is Krasnodar in Russia. One's called Tranknograd. They built a lot of, the old Soviet Union's tanks and even to Russia for a while. It was a large industrial city that built tanks, and they built them messy. And it was, as you can tell by the trash mountain, they dumped a lot of the sludge into the water. In fact, in Japan, companies that did, woodworking, wood refining, dumped so much chemical sludge in the water that when it came to cleanup, and this is an example of a potential market solution that no one realized, another company paid the city that had been contaminated for the right to clean up all the sludge, because the sludge had so many heavy chemicals in it that they could resell, scoop up, sort out, and reuse them and turn a profit. So the city actually made money on that. I know, weird. But the firms just trying to produce their papers, didn't worry about the dumpage. So a third person is, look, now, again, I always go to pollution because pollution has measurable cost. People are hurt by pollution. You can go back in history 100 plus years ago, even 50 years ago, and you'd have in today in some number of third world countries, Mexico City, Chinese cities, Indian cities, in which your air and water pollution are brutal and people suffer devastating from it. And I do mean devastating. I know I'm clearing my ear. It's because I felt like I had something there. They had devastating impacts from pollution. It was crippling. And so this was, as I said, I call it devastating because of the damage it did. And so this is when people would have, for example, you would have cities. Actually, this is your example, Europe, 1920s. There was the green fog episode. In other words, an inversion layer, serious inversion layer, went across Europe. It trapped the pollution in a number of valleys that were heavy industrial areas, heavy industrial pollution. It trapped them, and hundreds of people died from asphyxiations. In other words, they were people with, cardiovascular issues, breathing issues, and pollution went in. It was concentrated. It was too heavy, and those people died. In many of these places where you had heavy pollution, it was like people work smoking. Imagine smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day since you were born. That's what it was like. In fact, you can see movies from the 30s and 40s in which the jokes would be, so it'd say, I'm from Pittsburgh. Oh, the sun must be a new sight for you. Because Pittsburgh was a giant coal and steel manufacturing item, and they produced a lot of pollutants, and so you couldn't see the sky. Nobody wanted to hurt the people there on trying to make steel cheaply. And so, that's a damage. That's why I try to correct those things. Okay. Now, when the government's dealing with externalities, it's a reason point. Now, a lot of people say, like, oh, we could just get rid of pollution, and it's all sunny and beautiful and pristine. It's all perfect. No. And one, it's not all or nothing. It's not pollute or have a clean environment. A lot of people put it that way. It's like, no. We can reduce our pollution. Because the strict cost benefit analysis says, if I look at reducing my pollution, we're going to reduce our pollution 20%. Our measured benefit, our defined benefit, and a lot of big things, restored work days, because people are sick, they get work days back, because why? They're not sick often. Healthcare costs are really reduced. Damages to property, farms, even buildings, stuff like that. Pollution is very corrosive and stuff like that. Those things, when you reduce pollution, those things are reduced. Okay, now when we do reduce pollution, it's not all great because reduce pollution, people lose jobs and income. Now, in this case, And this means strict cost benefit analysis. Use these numbers to be simple. And it does work this way in the benefit and cost side. We got pollution reduction. We may be saving $200 billion in benefits to the general population. The industry that's reducing the pollution, they have higher costs because they have to deal with their pollution. They may lose $50 billion. And the net change for society is a positive. I guess I should have done green there because it's green. Is a positive, $150 billion. They say, okay, well, what if we go from minus 20 to minus 40? Well, the benefit's declining because remember, we've already got the minus 20 reduction. The measured benefit is much because there's much a gap. In other words, people and stuff like that aren't fragile to pollution. The ground stuff like that's not, just automatically destroyed. The damage is decreasing at reducing pollution. But a cost increase because here there may be some simple ways of reducing pollution that are on a be cost effective. Here I'm starting to do things that are more expensive. I can't get the fine scale. Now in this case, it's still a net plus 10. So cost benefit would say do it here and do it there because why? The benefit to society is greater than the cost, the measured benefit. Not someone says it's some theoretical absolute benefit, the actual measured benefit. Now if we go to 60, we may run into, okay, we reduced to 6, that's cool. We're only getting $30 billion in benefits. So what does that mean? The people at 60% pollution reduction and the people at 40% pollution reduction, these measurable costs aren't that what? Aren't that different. In other words, if I'm in a purely pristine area, next to no pollution, my healthcare expenses are insignificantly different from a place or city that has a 40% reduction in pollution. So I'm in an area with no real pollution, but my healthcare costs for that per person the same as somebody who has a 40% reduction in pollution. So in other words, I'm not getting any real measured benefit. Doesn't mean we can't do it. Just saying when you're doing cost benefit analysis, strict cost benefit, it's saying what is our discretely measurable benefit of reducing pollution? What is our discretely measurable cost of reducing pollution? A lot of people say it's worth any price because you are not the ones paying the price. That's why people say that. And again, it's not all or nothing. One of the saddest things, I'll repeat a number of times, we do ecological devastation, that people do not know today and have not learned is the fact of we are so much better off ecologically wise than we were 50 years ago. In other words, our air is cleaner. Do you know LA has gone through summers with no red alert smog days? Back in the early 70s, late 60s, you'd have them every single day during the summer. In which they'd say, if you have any health condition, do not go outside because between the heat and the pollution, particularly pollution, you're at risk. You may have a trigger of a heart attack or something like that. Because it was like you were smoking a pack or something like that, a cigarette, stuff like that. You couldn't do it. You can do that now. If you don't know that, you'll have people your age say, oh, it's never been as bad as it is now. It's horrible. The world's destroyed. It's like, no. In fact, when people think that, it leads to all sorts of bad policies that don't work and may create the very ecological devastation we want to avoid. Okay, disputed. Now, disputed said no theory. Left this side, no theory. Strict cost benefit. Yeah, both things agree with that. Yep, no problem. Disputed. The cost of known, the cost of reducing pollution, the amount of jobs, the lost output, how people get all that's known. We don't know if there's any benefit of reducing pollution. Global warming tends to fall in there. And it's going to always be to say some undefined benefit is worth any cost when you are not the one paying the cost. CO2 is naturally, in fact, CO2 is naturally occurring. If I'm sitting there in my chair doing nothing, just talking and being very mellow and slow, I'm generating very little CO2. When I get very animated like I do, I generate more CO2. When I'm bouncing around in the classroom like I was a bouncy ball, I'm generating a lot of CO2. If you're out there playing a sport, you're generating a lot of CO2. If you're riding a bike, you're actually generating more CO2 per pound than an automobile is. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't ride your bike. I'm pointing out. And CO2 is just CO2. Say, well, no, there's good CO2. See, if a deer's prancing in the woods, that's good CO2. That's okay. But if you have a sheep and people using and grazing sheep and raise them for, lamb or wool or something like that, that's bad CO2. No, they're both CO2. See, if we're dealing with sulfur dioxide, yeah, that could be dangerous. You're dealing with CO2, that's just, breathing. And so, as an economist, in general, as economists, we just like when they say it's someone defined benefits worth any cost because they are not the ones paying the cost. Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It's saying economists have to be very, very careful because we don't know what the benefit is. If it is worth, remember, an externality is a third-party cost. A and B do something A and B like, and C is hurt. You can make an argument that dealing with CO2 is the threat, like Al Gore and stuff like that says. Oh, yeah, he says, well, yeah, he's not getting hurt. Greta Thunberg's not getting hurt. All the Hollywood stars aren't getting hurt. Average people getting hurt. But it's worth any price. Wait a minute. That's a third-party cost. People advocating a policy that gives them benefit and a third person is hurt. That's a third-party cost. We'll see it most when we go to the next slide of this one. Utility-based. Saving the critters. Now, I use the term saving the critters because I'm just being off color and stuff like that. Save the critters. Now, the neo-Keynesians will tend to say, as a society, we can decide the value of saving any species on a societal level. In other words, as a society, we can decide, yes, we'll save this animal, we'll save that animal, we'll save that, that's fine. New classics say we have to be very careful because saving the critters creates a third-party cost. The people losing jobs and income are not the ones gaining from the polar bears. For example, in 2021, the Keystone XL pipeline, the U.S. government said, that's going out. We're not doing that one. When that was eliminated, direct cost, that is, 500,000 jobs are going to be created by that pipeline. And we're lost. All those people, no jobs. They're going to have good, better paying jobs, better situation, stuff like that. We push up the demand curves for jobs, increase wages, or supply jobs, increase wages because of productivity. Everybody wins. Higher gas prices, boom. That's a third-party cost. When they save the otters here, they're like otters. They're cute. They're nifty. You see them in zoos, and they're kind of great. They're funny creatures. Otters eat a fourth to half their body mass every day because they're a warm-blooded animal that lives in the water. Guess what? You're going to consume a lot of body mass, a lot of food just to stay alive. Well, when otters go in lobster beds, or I should say, more in crab beds, oyster beds, stuff like that. An otter is going to eat all of the oysters, the crabs, and stuff like that. Which means if I'm an oysterman or a lobsterman, otters coming into my beds where I harvest is going to destroy me because they're going to eat it all. Now, so we just move the otters away. Well, funny thing is, when they try to move the otters away, no cheap thing. Remember, moving these things costs money. And the money doesn't come from nowhere. The otters actually swim back to where there was good eating. They remember good eating here, and they head for it. So the people who are saving the otters, they feel good about themselves. The people who lost their jobs, they feel horrible. Another example, going back, when they protect the spotted owl, or when they protect eagles, right? Everyone gets protecting spotted owls or eagles. I'm pointing out the difficulty here. When they protect the spotted owls, tens of thousands of square miles of timberland could no longer be, harvested. You couldn't do logging there anymore. So whole logging towns lost their reasons for existing because they were logging towns. You had a lot of people feeling good about saving the owls, but if you're one of those loggers, your job just got destroyed. In fact, your town is now dead. So your house in this town is now basically worthless. You lost everything. Did you really get anything out of the otter? No. A lot of people say, oh, no. They get so much utility for the otter. They love losing it. Really. If someone told Greta Thunberg she was going to be a poor person struggling around the street, no TV, no multi-millionaire parents dumping money on her, she'd be going in the garbage cans the rest of her life and living in, at best, a one-room flat with sneakers she wears for 10 years until she wears holes in them, and no TV attention, she'd be saying what? How dare you? How dare you? I know I'm being mean, but that's the whole point. She's not the one paying. And sometimes people don't get you to without saving creatures. If you're a pure Darwinian, if you're a Darwinian survival of the fittest, hey, if the otter can't live, that's its tough luck. People shouldn't think that. You're imposing your utility on somebody else. And this is a difficulty. This is a problem of say, doesn't mean you can't. It points out the problems. Nowadays, a lot of times, when people who live deep in rural areas and stuff like that, and they do, farming and ranching and stuff like that, if they see an eagle land in their property, they shoot it and bury it. Because if an eagle makes a nest somewhere, you can do no economic activity within 1 mile, whatever the eagle's habitat range is. Don't worry, the government lets you theoretically keep your property, but you can't do anything with it. Why do they let you keep your property? Because then they can say they didn't take your property. So you can't do anything on a property, including live on it, that might upset the eagle, which means I can't do any of my farming or, mining or, cattle ranching, anything activity. Which means I've lost this property. No one's going to buy it from me because why? There's an eagle there. So what? I lost. That's a third-party cost. Somebody feels good about saving it. Somebody else is hurt. And I mean measurably. People say, well, then the government should compensate them. Okay, but there's some person who doesn't care about the eagle. Why should they pay taxes to compensate the person who lost their land when they're like, well, I'm just leaving people's land? This is the difficulty. I apologize. Excuse me. What I have is horrible sinuses. And so it's been raining and stuff like that. And my sinuses are like hooga booga. On the happy note, Dr. Duncan, his daughter-in-law gave birth to their first grandchild. So, keep her and the family in the praise. Because it's always cool. Children are great. Grandchildren are even greater. You know why? Because grandchildren, you get to play with them, have fun, and give them to your children and watch your children suffer. A twofer. Okay, worse than this is something that's come along. I pick on the impact of communism. It's not for neither two economic theories. Both economic theories say debate, discuss, decide, figure out what works. Is the creation in debate over externalities, which neither theory want, is the idea of debate endage. The science is settled. You may not speak of it. How dare you, a global warming denier? You are not allowed to talk. And people do this because it's easier to win an argument by shutting the other side down. In fact, now you have people saying, if we want democracy, we must what? We must protect democracy by banning the other side. Oh, speech is hurtful and harmful. You're endangering democracy. So you must arrest them and throw them in jail because that's saving democracy. You know what's funny? There are two groups of people who said that once. In the Soviet Union, when the Reds overthrew the Legislative Assembly, they said they're saving democracy. They're saving the workers' democratic state. Nazi Germany, when they banned discussion of that, they say they're saving a true German democratic state. So there's development of shutting down of people. Hold on. Sorry. My youngest daughter invaded again. Yeah, back to breathing. It's so weird to have everything inverted. So I'm like, you know, you understand. You're seeing a certain way. It's like everything's inverted when I had a little camera there. Okay, but this idea of shutting down people who don't agree, that comes from communist theory, which says those who don't agree should be shut down and banned. Whereas in true economic theory says why, discuss, prove. In other words, theory, observation theory, more observation. Find out what works. Because they say everybody doesn't agree, they should be banned. They did. Lots of people have lost jobs and been banned for not having the proper viewpoint on global warming. Okay, now when you do that, that's horrible. I'm not even being mean there. So what if the green policies are worse for the environment? Because if you engage these green policies and they don't work, in fact, they cost more resources, they cost more money, they do more ecological damage. For example, Texas has lots of windmills because the government paid for windmills to be more. When what's occurring is windmill blades wear out very fast, but they're non-decayable. In other words, they don't break down easily. When they break down, they have lots of fibers and filaments that can damage the soil, and they lead to groundwater pollution and the endangerment of an ecosystem. No, they're windmill blades. They're sacred. They can't hurt anything because they're windmills. It's clean. It's green. It's waste. It's waste that cannot be disposed of easily. Any solution for dealing with them? So right now, they're buried. And they slowly break down, and they break down to little fibrous filaments. Which it's funny, there was something like this before. The whole reason asbestos was banned is because asbestos fibers can cause damages to lungs. These are larger fibers, but they can, because they don't decay, they can do damage to ecosystems. But no one's allowed to talk about these things. When you're trying to cut all the windmills, CO2 emissions, can't go back to the previous slide, creating concrete, just the concrete needed the amount of windmills they want to have, and the lines to support them, would increase and has increased the CO2 emissions of every country that's done it, because concrete generates a lot of CO2 in the pouring, mixing, and curing of concrete. No, that doesn't matter. That's good. And this is the difficulty. You ban the other side. I'm going to pick on Harrison Ford here. I enjoy him as an actor, but he's an age of the empire. He said this. The actor said this. Harrison Ford said this. Peasants, the world is being destroyed by Americans and all their dirty little cars. The Americans should be banned. They should be allowed to have cars. The Americans are dirty little cars. They're dirty little selfish Americans. Okay, Harrison Ford has a private jet and a helicopter, and he has a giant estate, and he has lots of cars. In fact, he's got a few cars. And he says, "Well, I also have an electric," which doesn't use much because just for putting around close because it's got limited range. But he's rich. He's got several cars. He has several jets. And so point out, but wait a minute, Mr. Ford. Just one flight in your jet, one flight to one place and back, will generate more pollution than any American's car will in a year. He goes, "Oh, my jet's not moving well. It's Americans. All those Americans, they're dirty little cars. They've given their dirty little cars, dirty little people in their cars." Okay, well, how many systems of justice has Harrison Ford believe in? There's one for him, nobility. He's allowed to pollute whatever he wants and be wasteful. Same for Al Gore. Pick an Al Gore, because Al Gore does the same thing. He plies everyone in private jets. He consumes resources and generates pollution immensely. But he has no nobility. Greta Thunberg, I picked on before. She does the same thing. Her stunt of, no, she went in an eco yacht. Well, see, building the eco yacht that was theoretically had no footprint, it was totally green. Well, it didn't spring up from the ground like a mushroom. It had to be produced. in producing a yacht was resource and waste intensive. And then after she made a stunt of sailing to the United States, she had to be flown back, which went in a semi-private, so that generated pollution. And her and a crew that came across the ocean, and then another crew had to be flown in so they could sail the ship back. How many systems of justice does she believe in? 2. There's one for the peasants, we're down here, and there's one for the nobility, they're up here. What they just destroy? Equality under the law. That's why I picked a number of billionaires, people like that, is because they wish to destroy equality under the law. The reason I pick out some of the Green Movement is they want to destroy equality under the law. Okay, income redistribution, we will deal with in greater detail later. We're going to touch it, lightly here. Mm-hmm. I'm so sorry. I had to rush to the bathroom because I have sinus difficulties, all the moisture and stuff like that from the rain. My sinuses are all over the place, and then I've been talking, so the sinuses went right in my throat. I know way too much information, but I want you to understand why I fled. Because I want to blow it all over my computer. Okay, income distribution is very expensive. This is when, roughly speaking, I'm going to take money from A, give it to B, to A will be lowered, and B will be raised. This is very expensive and very disputed in terms of results on GDP. It's a pure normative because the two theories have no overlap. Even the neo-Keynesians will be cautious about income redistribution, not because they want income redistribution. They want to raise the poor up. The rich in the middle have money; they can give the poor and raise the poor. But they say you have to be careful on not going too far because there may be reactions. The new classicalists say you may create social economical damage by doing that. In other words, Keynes will say we can do this to reduce social economic damage, to make society better off. The classicists say you may actually do the opposite result. In other words, they have totally contradictory viewpoints. If we get a chance, later in the semester, we'll go to this one again in detail. But this one is very expensive. And because it's so expensive, because remember, creating taxes, that create a lot of deadweight losses. Deadweight losses are not recovered anywhere. And again, law and order and perfect competition, ensuring markets, those are nice. Those are easy. I don't need much. In other words, I could have a 2-cent tax on just liquor sales, and I've achieved 1 and 2. I can have a 15% import tax, and I can cover national defense. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. It's a pure normative. Here's one we have run a couple. These are cases. I'd like to cover these cases so you can understand it. Here's one of Elias Christians. Don't impose your morality on me. This is a common canard or a debate ender. It's silly. You know why? Because once you agree there will be a law, whatever the law is, you have imposed morality. That's it. Once you've established there will be a law, you will not, you shall not. You have imposed morality. You've imposed someone's morality. The only question will be then, whose morality? When people say that, don't impose morality. What they're saying is, your opinion, your beliefs should not be allowed. You should not be allowed to speak. Your ideas do not matter. When they say this one, they're saying, this is where I should be, and you are a peasant. You should be down here. Your thoughts should not be allowed. And when they do that, they are destroying equality under the law. In other words, the commonest of, as I said, both new classicalists and neo-Keynesians both say, hey, debate it, talk it, discuss it. Let the exchange of ideas, figure it out. Don't worry about it. You'll be able to figure it out. Don't even think about it. That's they both say that. They say there's no need to get all woogie woogie. But they still both say don't destroy equality law. Do not, because when you do that, you destroy equality. Because the easiest way of winning a debate is to ban the other side. So that's why you get all these hate speech laws. They're doing hate speech. This speech is, in many corporations, my office, at school, it would be, oh, it's a crime. It's a hate office. Okay, what I have in my office? Picture of my wife and kids. Yes, he's flaunting his heteronormativity at me. It's making me feel oppressive. It's a mean work environment. Okay, are you going to have equality the law in which your gay rights flag, or which is far more sticking out there, or you with your significant other are offending me? No, that's self-expression. How dare you deny my self-expression? What did I just do? I destroyed equality the law. In fact, there are many people who believe equality the law is inequality law. So many communists, this thought comes from the communists, to make somebody equal to me. I thought, oh, you're oppressing me. That's why the hate speech. If you apply hate speech equally, people won't like it. And that's a difficulty because they don't like the results. That's that problem with that whole equity fight. When you go for equity, you destroy equality results, you destroy equality under the law. Sweden a few years ago banned opposition to transgender movement as oppression. Again, the same thing Colorado was doing. You can't get somebody to convert away from that. That's oppression. Why? And there was so many saying this does not work. This policy you want to engage in does not work. You should not do that because it will fail. You're promoting something that does not function. In fact, from an economic point of view, I am promoting a lifestyle that does not function. Take just figures. People who are straight have 2% thought risk of suicide. People who go transgender have 50-odd%. That has not changed. In other words, if we talked about that 70 years ago, it was 50%. It is today, with a decade and a half of saying it's great, it's wonderful, and the whole thing is, well, if everybody was forced to say what I'm doing is great, then I won't feel bad. But everybody must come and kiss me and kiss my toes and say I'm wonderful. What have I just done to other people? I've made them inferior to you. And so, that difficulty. The U.S. government classified Christians and ex-military has more like, this goes back 3 years. This is not in the Trump administration, but in the Biden administration. Classified Christians and ex-military is more likely terrorists. Yet Islamicists, followed by Reds, communist terrorists, followed by eco-terrorists, have done the most damage in lives and property. They say, oh no, you can go look it up. It's like, oh no. See, like, for example, if you go in the FBI stats, they have people of classified dozens of pictures of people who committed crimes. And if you look, half of them will have white underneath them. And they're not white. In fact, a great case that would get buried once it was discovered was the Atlanta child killings. It was a big case, and I think it was 79, 80. In which someone was, attacking, little black boys in Atlanta, and they were killing them. And so the thing was, it's some white guy. It was a black gay guy. He was raping, killing. The raping part was being suppressed because the police were like, well, this is an important piece of information we'll be able to use to help catch the killer. But then the media was all going saying it's some white guy who hates black people. So that's actually recorded when people do these stats as some white person was attacking black people. It was a black gay guy who was killing these kids. The shootings in DC. I point these out to say who has committed the actions, who has committed the terror. Well, yeah, but they don't like Christians. The fact they classified ex-military is stunning. Because what they do is they say, "Well, see, this person said hurtful words," or they'll take somebody who's committed a crime for a crime's sake, and they'll say, "Well, that's an act of terror." When it was no, it's a crime for crime's sake. This one's a great one. That is Major Nadal Hussain. He killed 14 people, 13 the pregnant woman, so I count the baby as a human being, I'll admit. The U.S. military, a few years ago, fired an officer who said the upper ranks, the generals, are all communists. And it was a bunch of communists They want the government to control the economy. They want to squelch free speech and believe the government should seize control of everything to save the nation. The military fired him for saying that. And I said on his own time, and he said they believes in communism, but no one couldn't investigate because how dare you slander people? Well, wait a minute. If your upper ranks are full of communists, they may want to overthrow you. Major Nadal Hussain, the one who killed the 14 people, he was Islamic. He was a shrink. Do you see he's got the little medical symbol here? He was a psychologist, theoretically speaking. He's got his own head worked on. When he killed, he walked into a Fort Hood, not quite wreck, but a family greeting for when people go for the people overseas and stuff like that, and shot a number of family members of military, some of which were overseas, and killed them. His business card, U.S. government business card, said Soldier of Allah. He had done presentations for years saying the United States is a horrible, ugly country, and when Islam liberates and crushes the United States, it'll be a great day. Nobody said this guy's nuts. Because you know why? If you said this guy hates the United States, they would have said you're picking on a Muslim. You bad human being, and your career ends. We measure by the same standard. No, we're not. Because we did not measure by the same standard, 14 people died. After those 14 people died, the military did not go into any policy of how do I find out if this is a problem. They said diversity is our strength. The only problem exists is people say diversity is not our strength. We should get rid of them. Are we measuring by the same standard? We are not. That's a brute. Okay, again, the loss to be quiet under the law. It is damaging. It's massively damaging, but effective. A lot of people want it because they don't want a debate. They want my viewpoint, my ideology, my view should hold. You should sit back in the corner and do what I tell you. Well, I picked on the homosexual right not to be offended. The Ninth Circuit had a great one. These two cases went to the Ninth Circuit at the same time. You can't invent this stuff. Ninth Circuit's the one in California. Okay, these two cases went to the Ninth Circuit. One was in the same year, a Pledge of Allegiance case. State law was everyone going to school should do the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, the Pledge of Allegiance case says someone doesn't want to do the pledge, they can, sit up. They don't have to do the pledge. They can just, sit back, not do the pledge. Everything's good. And so you could. But parents sued saying it's not fair that their atheist child had to hear someone say under God to do the atheist child didn't like the United States, and hear a pledge to the United States. That was oppressive. It might offend Major Nadal Hussain. Right? And so they sued. A number of atheists sued, I should say atheists in fairness to, Muslim Americans. A number of atheists sued say you can't have that. Now, they were given the opt-out. At the same time, going up was California started sex ed, rather explicit sex ed, starting in kindergarten. Kindergarten here. And a lot of parents said, wait a minute, we don't want sex ed. We don't think a 5-year-old should be exposed to, sex practices and stuff like that. We don't believe it should be imposed. That should be done. And we want our child to opt out. We're not saying you can't do what the other kids they want. We want our child to opt out. The Ninth Circuit said, listen, when your child goes to school, your child belongs to the school, and the government in school can do whatever they want to them. You shut up and just take it. The Ninth Circuit to equality law? No, they destroyed equality law. Because equality law would say what? Okay, the pledge case, if everybody has to, no opt-out, do sex ed, then everybody does the pledge. Because the government has decreed the kid belongs to the government. Or if, people can, you can't have, the pledge because people don't like it, you can't have sex ed because people don't like it. Either way would have been totally consistent. the fact they did it two different ways destroys equality of the law, because the Ninth Circuit says, well, the people who don't like the pledge, I like the atheists. The people who don't like sex ed, I don't like them. In terms of, I mentioned a number of these cases, and I could do all of them. Should I just pick one or two, and you can look at them? But a New Hampshire woman lost her daughter because her daughter was going to school, and her daughter became saved, found the Lord, 10, went to school, and was talking about salvation to the kids and reading from the Bible and stuff like that. She was removed from her mother, and given to the state because the judge said she was too young to have made such a deep decision, and she has to see lots of other faiths before she can make that decision. Do they do it with transgenders? Do they do that to Muslims who have that, or atheists? Go back to him. Oh, wait a minute, your atheist kid, he's way too young to make that decision. And no, they didn't. In other words, you destroyed equality of the law. Now, beware of the perfect being the enemy of the good. There was something called the Frankfurt School. In fact, a lot of people hear critical theory. That was created by the communism and refined by the Frankfurt School. A bunch of communists emigrated to the United States in the late 30s. And they created the idea of the perfect being the enemy of the good. In other words, you do not attack someone with your ideals. You attack it with perfection. And people assume when you attack something that's good, with all the things that goes wrong with it, you must have something better. But you don't. But they're lying or they're half-truthing to achieve their objective. In which they're attacking perfection. Because then they'll say, oh, well, this thing's bad. You must have something else you are doing that would be what? That would be better. That would be an improvement. And, what is it? I'm not being cruel here. I am, pointing out in terms of, what is the thing we are, replacing it with. They don't say that. Sorry. And so when people become their own gods, they can lie to achieve their ends. They can measure by different standards, and they destroy equality law. And people say oppressors should not be allowed to speak. They actually, Harvard and Yale Law School both said, we will not tolerate the intolerant. Wait a minute, but wouldn't that make you intolerant? And the idea of intolerance is people who do not agree with what they want to do. And that, is the danger. Because what are they doing? They're getting rid of, banning people who are not doing what they want to do. And that is a problem because you destroy speech. Okay, now here's an interesting one. This is just a government will tend to favor moral anarchy. It'll favor moral anarchy because it will cause more people to be hurt and devastated, and thus need the government to help them. Group ideology seeks to destroy the existing system and replace it with their own, and it will destroy equality of law to do that. In fact, again, most groups, equality of law is a very Christian concept. It's very, you can say it's Judeo-Christian, but it's fantastically rare. Most groups, most religions, atheism, communism, to make the other side equal to you is a violation. It is oppression to do that. And so they want to, and they'll say ban it because they'll say what? I'm being oppressed. Unless you ban the person that doesn't agree with me, you're oppressing me. That's why they created microaggressions, of which they don't apply equally. Nature pours vacuums, especially moral ones. And Ivy Tower was an idea of I want things to be so much. We run across number of times. It's going to be in the government, often the government too. The lack of self-virtue is license to do whatever you want. It was sold by the devil as freedom. It creates damage when you lose your virtue, when you lose the idea of there's right, wrong, good and evil, there are absolute standards to measure by, then there becomes a greater need for the government to impose its virtue by force. Which most of these movements have banned the idea of there being higher morality. Now, they all want a morality, but dictated by their rules, which again are very double standard. In other words, they all destroy equality under the law. They all eliminate it. They all say, "Well, I have a right to do this." Example of this is when Judge Kavanaugh was up. People said we have to stop Judge Kavanaugh to save abortion. A number of people came forward and said Kavanaugh attacked them. When the FBI came to them and said, you're doing this under oath, and if you're lying under oath, you can be, arrested and sent to jail for perjury. And they said, "Oh, never mind. I see you just endangering abortion." And people said that come out and say he did something so we could stop him from being confirmed. I just wanted to stop him from being confirmed, so I said he did this. So he didn't do this. No, he didn't. The only reason the person did not lie, she was willing to lie, was because of the fact of she might be charged with a crime of perjury, lying under oath. And she had no problem lying under oath. I am pointing out that lack of virtue. When everybody can do what's right in their own eyes, and the government will promote this moral anarchy. The government will promote moral anarchy because you need the government to impose virtue by force. In 1920s Germany, it was said, it's the Germany of cabaret, of freedom. Oh, everything was wonderful in the 20s. And they'd say the courts are run by fascists. And the people did every crime in the book. In fact, Berlin was violent and unsafe. As a young woman at night, you could not walk the streets of Berlin without getting raped. In fact, as a young man, there were roving gangs of young male rapists, and they would rape you too. In other words, even though you had economically was going decently at the time, you had lots of crime. Well, lots of crime gets the people to react and be fearful. So if people have to choose between a police state and anarchy, they will choose a police state because at least they're safe at night. In fact, the revolutionaries who were saying the courts are run by fascists because they wanted to counter-revolutionary, in the 30s they got their wish. The courts are run by fascists. But the streets were safe at night. You could be a girl, a young woman, coming off, your shift because you're working, an odd shift and you're coming, back home from the printing plant and it's 2 a.m. No one bothers you. The closer you come to is a German policeman goes by and says, are you okay? Fraulein, do you need someone to escort you to home? Everything's safe. Yes, of course, stuff like that. And I'm not advocating it. In other words, why'd you get the fascists? Because people wanted the streets to be safe at night. They wanted to know they weren't going to be attacked. They wanted to know they weren't bad things not going to happen to them. Why? Well, the government, the revolutionaries, were promoting anarchy. That's unusual. There we go. The revolutionaries were promoting anarchy, hoping they would be the ones to gain power. Instead, a different type of socialist organization, fascists, who were socialist, gained power. And keep in mind, people say, the fascists, it's on the right, it's on the right. No. The fascists are a socialist organization. The Nazis are a socialist organization. Look at this thing. All those people are regimented. All these people here, let's put a little glowy thing. All these people here, they're regimented by society to be there. They're all being coordinated by the all-powerful state for the needs of the collective people. As you lose morality, which we've already discussed some of these, how do you expect government officials to be moral and just? How do you expect your fire, military, and police? Now, those ones have suffered the least. We already dealt with the military, have the item with Major General Hassan. But, like fire suffers the least of items. So they did have the fire chief in LA, which had a bunch of fires. And someone said, you changed all the standards for firemen, and what happens if a man passes out in his kitchen because of the fire, and the fireman can't get him out because they can't lift his weight? The fire police, the firehead, not police, the firehead in LA said, well, if you're a man and you get knocked out by a fire, that's your problem. That's kind of a you problem. Wow, it's good she cares about. Well, it's a man. She's alternatively preferenced, but she thinks she's a man. Okay, so that's an extreme case, but that was one of the cases. So it's that high expecting military. In fact, we talk about the generals being all communists. How do you expect them to actually obey orders? In fact, the former chief of staff had told the Chinese general in commanding that Trump is a bad person, and if anything's wrong happening, don't worry, I will tell you everything and all our secrets to keep Trump checked. That's not his job. She's basically saying he's willing to overthrow the president of the United States because he doesn't like him. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, former justice in the Supreme Court, said, I consult other brilliant decisions of other nations' courts. No. You're the Supreme Court of the United States. The only thing that binds you is the Constitution of the United States first, because that gives you your power, and defines your limits, and other rulings by the U.S. Supreme Court. You can't look at other countries' courts because, to quote Justice Alito, or actually Scalia actually said it first, when you're writing a constitution, you can quote whoever you want. When you're enforcing a constitution, the constitution is your binding document, nothing else. She had said when a number of countries were writing constitutions, do not use the U.S. Constitution, it is too old. In fact, why not? In other words, if you have something that's worked for over 250 years, or 230 odd years now, that kind of shows it's pretty good. A lot of countries are already on their third, fourth, and fifth constitutions in 50 years, and they keep changing them, like not the way we amended, like massively change them because we didn't like this one. When they legalized gay marriage, Justice Kennedy said he dismissed anybody opposed to gay marriage because they just don't like gay people. That's what he actually said in his writing in support of the majority. It's like, well, no, they actually raise points in front of you, has the risk, and many of their points have been proven true. Dan Rather. We'll do this one because I mentioned this. This is so cool. Dan Rather, in fact, I mentioned this one. I like this one better. The other case there, but I just enjoy this one because it's mind blowing that he did this. He, back in 2004, I believe, I don't even know, 2004, he said he had these documents of George Bush the Younger from his commanding officer, who was dead, proving George Bush did attend jails and he was a lousy, useless human being and should be, thrown out of the military, and he's this, that, and all sorts of, then look, we have these documents. He shows these documents. And someone looked at it. Now, this is an example of, see, the media did not discover this. They're all, keep in mind, he's been in media, like he was already in his 80s then. He'd been in media since the 60s, and this is very important. A person looked at the documents and said, wait a minute, those documents look interesting. This is where, this is why the media wants to ban free speech and ban the internet, because, fake information. Well, one guy said, he put on his Word document on standard settings and typed up the entire document in an automatic. In other words, that whole document Dan Rather was saying was done on Word's default settings. In fact, Dan Rather this was theoretically documents from 1960s. Dan Rather should have looked at this document and said it is faked. And the reason is this document was self-justified on both sides. So it's like that. In other words, the two column line, like a ruler edge on both sides. You could not do that in a typewriter. If you're a master typist, you might be able to do that. That was done usually in typesetting. But you could not, in other words, you couldn't do that back then. It could not be done. It was, I said, if you were a master typist, the colonel, because the colonel's secretary was still alive, she's like, I didn't type this up. He was known, everybody knew he typed with 2 fingers. Self-specified on both sides. It had superscripts, like it'd be like the 5th, and it'd have the TH up, and subscripts. So you might have the 5th with it up there. It's up, there we go, my 5th. And subscripts, which typewriters knew you had to half click them, and they wouldn't be shrunken, they'd be the same size. He had curly cues. You had that double slack thing that does this at the beginning of a quote and that at the end of the quote. It had those. Typewriters didn't do that. Typewriters had what? They were straight, like the typewriter key. In other words, within 15 minutes, the internet revealed this document was false. In fact, that font didn't even exist that was used. It was a WordPerfect font. It was not, I should say Word font. It was not a standard font in a typewriter. In fact, there was like only a few typewriters in Texas that had that font. After it was revealed it was all faked, Dan Rather said this one. Well, even if this document's not true, what it's telling us is true, and that George Bush did these ugly things. But you had no proof. In fact, Dan Rather had actually gotten official documents about George Bush the Younger requesting, volunteering for service in Vietnam as a fighter pilot because he was trained as a fighter pilot. And the reply from the Air Force saying, no, we want our pilots who are going to be in the Air Force for 20 or 30 years so we get their full experience. You just want to, serve your 8 years. And so he was turned down. Dan Rather had those documents. Those were official documents. He shelved them saying they were unimportant. In other words, he lied. He falsified things because he was going to do that. A scandal that came in, this in which the U.S. government was turned out he was giving billions, tens of billions of dollars to NGOs to theoretically help people, and the NGOs are using it to lobby in Washington. Literally speaking, this would be money which we're giving $5 billion to a group of people to theoretically, help people overseas or poor people in the United States, and they all just stayed in Washington, in which they paid themselves great salaries, their friends great salaries, their friends' great salaries, their children's great salaries, and 98% of the money just stayed in Washington, D.C., greasing people. A lot of it being used to lobby the government to spend more money and donations to campaigns. None of it went to help the people that were going to help. The big thing you got now is, why is the government persecuting him? In other words, Virginia, as we'll note later, actually passed a law preventing people from revealing corruption. The ends justifies the means. We've been doing this for a while, and I apologize. Keep in mind, you can stop at any time when viewing this, so it's all cool. That's the nice thing about pause. I feel I finish it all in one set and get it done. This has been around for a long time. We did them. This is gay false hate crimes. The vast majority of hate crimes against gays are done by the gays themselves or other gays to set things up. Heck, when was Lamont Hill? No, not Lamont Hill. I can't. Jesse Smollett. Yes, when he was theoretically attacked by white guys. It was 2 Nigerian guys he hired to theoretically attack him so he could claim he was attacked by white guys. That's a false hate crime. And so the thing is, we need more hate crimes to protect people. The late Pope Benedict made comments on Islam, quoting earlier popes. Oh, how they say that is so hateful. No, he was actually quoting the popes who's saying Islam has no obligation to keep any treatment or agreement they have made and have broken every agreement they have made. That was a true item there. The Muslim cartoons. Let's finish off in the Muslim cartoons because they're kind of fun. Muslim cartoons. This one it goes back to Denmark. This goes back again 20 years, but I just love this one. Almost 20 years because it was just funny. Well, in a sad way. Denmark in the late 90s, early noughts got a large Muslim population. Went from 0 to 10% of the population. Schools, some schools, they were 20, 30, 40% of the population. And so she's like, you need a children's book on Muhammad because a lot of Muslim kids would like to read about the history of Muhammad. There was no anything. She just wanted to write an accurate story of Muhammad for children to watch, but she couldn't get an artist. Children book had pictures. She couldn't get an artist. She wrote the major newspaper saying, I can't get an artist for the children's book. Do you know anybody who'd like to do my illustrations for a children's book? The paper said, hey, anyone want to do illustrations on Muhammad, send them in and we'll publish cartoons. 13 cartoons were sent in. Most of them were very mundane. One had a Muslim guy with a bomb in his turban. Another one had Muhammad at a bunch of steps, a bunch of burnt-out guys walking up going, stop, stop, we've run out of virgins. Those are two controversial ones. They were banned. In fact, Yale said, New York Times said, we would never do such printing of cartoons that desecrates one of the great world religions. We've never done that to any religion. A week earlier, they had cartoons insulting Christianity, which they done regularly. Are we insulting one of the world's great religions? Yes. In fact, the New York Times said, speech should be suppressed so it doesn't hurt Muslim feelings. It gives the way they think. When Yale did a book on those cartoons, a full book on those cartoons, right? They did not show the cartoons. You have a whole book theoretically covering these cartoons, their impact. You not show the picture of the cartoons. Oh, they're too controversial. People see them and faint. It's, a cartoon. It wasn't, explicit or anything like that. It was, are we measuring that same standard? We are not. These things destroy equality under the law. I mentioned them elections because, where, when things done and the double standards done. I guess I'll touch the Alaska election Senate because in 2008 there was an Alaska Senate race in which a senator was accused of corruption. DAs were prosecuting the case. The DAs, by law, they must share all information with the defense, and the DAs had information that proved the senator was not guilty. In other words, that he didn't commit the crime he was being charged with. They had proof he didn't do it. They suppressed it until after he lost the election and the other guy won. Then they let the information out. Don't worry, the DAs did get better positions in the new administration. And so that's unethical. Thank you very much. It was great having you.